Boker Tov, good Erev Shabbos. Today's daf yomi is Sanhedrin Nun Tes, Sanhedrin 59. Today's daf is dedicated for Shemir for the Chayalim, Hatzah for the Shvuyim, and Yeshua for Am Yisrael in this Eis Tzara. So we're going to start on 59a, two lines from the top. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Ovek Uchavim She'osek B'Torah. If there's an idolater who's Osek B'Torah, Pashup Pshat means it means he's studying Torah. Chayav Misa, he's liable for Misa, as it says, Torah Tzivalanu Moshe Morasha. Torah was Tzivalanu Moshe. Moshe commanded to us the Torah, and we say Lanu Morasha. It's he gave it to us as a Morasha, as an inheritance or a heritage. It's for us. V'lo but not for them. So the Gemara says, the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, why don't we count this as one of the 7 Noahide laws? The Gemara says, well, it actually is. There's 2 ways to read the word Morasha. Mandamar Morasha, the one who reads it as Morasha, an inheritance, Migzal Kagazel. Well, then the idolater is stealing from us. He's stealing our inheritance. Mandamar Me'orasa, the one who reads it as Me'orasa, as the Torahs are betrothed, then Dino Kanara Marasa. It's like he's having adultery with our betrothed maiden, the Viskila. So Rabbi Meir challenges this. Meisvei, well, the Gemara challenges from a Brisa. Rabbi Meir Omer Minayin Shafiu Ovik Kochavim Bosik B'Torah Shukid Kohen Gadol. We see if the idolater studies Torah, he's like the Kohen Gadol. And it says Asher Yasel Otam Ha'adam V'Chai B'Hem. It does not say Kohanim Levim v'Yisraelim unem, or it doesn't say Kohanim Levim and Yisraelim should do these laws. Ela ha'adam, a person, ha'amadata, shafilu obi kochavim osik b'Torah, that even if there's an idolater who studies Torah, hareo k'kohen gadol, he's equivalent to the high priest. Gemara says Hasam b'sheva mitzvot tidel. That's referring to the idolater who studies the 7 Noahide laws. Such a person is equivalent to the kohen gadol. Something to bear in mind as this week's parasha talks about Mamlechet Kohanim B'Goy Kadosh, that we're supposed to be a kingdom of priests. But if there's a Noahide who studies Torah that relates to the 7 Noahide laws, he's the equivalent of even the Kohen Gadol. This idea of idolater who studies Torah is liable for Misa. Rambam says he's not actually liable for Misa. It means that we tell him we tell him it's not appropriate. But there is a lot of discussion. What does it mean? So some say it refers only to the oral law, the rabbinic Judaism, and not to the written Torah. Others say the Netziv was mechadesh, that it only refers to an idolater who tries to come up with his own chidushim in the Torah, but not to just studying the Torah. And also, if there's extenuating circumstances why one should study Torah, let's say the person's converting, or a person, or there's a value that you're trying to teach this person to teach to the rest of the world, and it's clearly not within this prohibition. So he says also eating blood from a living animal is prohibited to the Noahides. Tana Rabbanan, what's the basis for this? It says in the pasuk after the flood, that you're not allowed to eat the flesh of its soul. And that refers to Aver Menachai, that you can't eat the flesh of a living animal. Whereas Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel Omer Afadam Menachai, that it comes to include also, in addition to the Aver Menachai, it also includes the blood from the living animal. My time at the Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel, what's the basis? Karibe Basar ben Amsholo Tochel. Says in the pasuk that you cannot eat the flesh in the soul, and we have to read it as Basar ben Amsholo Tochel and also Damo ben Amsholo Tochel. So you read it as prohibiting both. Rabbanan say no. Ahula Mishrei Shiratzim Huda Asa. That's pasuk is telling us that it's that Aver Menachai is only prohibited to animals, but not to the Shiratzim, because they don't have the dam as separate from the basar. They don't have the blood as separate from the flesh. Similarly, Ki adam hu nefesh. It says, be strong not to eat the blood, because the blood is the soul. Za'ever min achai. Ki adam hu nefesh. So this text is actually we have Girsa issues to take it out. Rabbanan say, Hahu adam hakaza shanasham yotzveh. The Rabbanan say, and when it says that you can't eat the blood of the animal, it's referring to the animal when if you take out blood from the animal for hakaza, for bloodletting, that's telling us that is not allowed to be eaten. So so the Gemara asks the question, why does this law of Aver Menachai need to be said to the Noahides and then repeated again at Sinai? The Gemara says, like Rav Yossi Bar Chanina, Kadam Rav Yossi Bar Chanina, Rav Yossi Bar Chanina, well, mitzvah shenemar b'nei Noach v'nishnas b'Sinai, any mitzvah which was said to the Noahides and then repeated at Sinai, was that nemra? It was in fact said to both. So therefore, both the Noahides and the Jews are commanded, and that's why it was repeated at Sinai. But Livnei Noach v'lo b'Sinai, let's say it was said to the Noahides and not repeated at Sinai. Well, Yisrael Nemrav Livnei Noach. That means it was only intended for the Jews and not for the Noahides. And the only example of this is Va'anu Ein Lanu El Gid Anasha Aliba de Rabbi Yehuda. The only example of this is the prohibition of eating the Gid Anasha, the sciatic nerve, according to the position of Rabbi Yehuda, who says that it was commanded to the Bnei Yaakov, and then it wasn't repeated again at Sinai, but it applies to all of the Jews. So now let's analyze the statement of this price. So Amar Mar, what's the source state? Kol mitzvah shenemar b'nei Noach v'nishnas b'Sinai was that nemra. Any mitzvah which was said to the Bnei Noach and then repeated again at Sinai was basically said to both. So Adarabah, the Gemara says it should be the opposite. Midinishas b'Sinai. From the fact that the Torah repeats it at Sinai, it should no longer apply to the Noahides. It means it should apply to the Jewish people only, and not to the idolaters, not to the Bnei Noach. So the Gemara says, no, we don't say that. Why? From the fact that we learned the prohibition of idolatry at Sinai, and we know that idolaters are not allowed to, the Noahides are not allowed to do idolatry. That proves that it was said to both. Says the Gemara, what's about the other part of this statement? What about if it was said to the Bnei Noach, but it was not repeated at Sinai, or Yisrael? Then we say, that means if it was said to the Noahides and not repeated at Sinai, that means it's intended only for the Jews and not for the Bnei Noach. The Gemara says this also, it should be Adrab, just the opposite. I mean, and the fact that it's not said at Sinai, it should be it's only prohibited to the Noahides and not the Jews. The Gemara says no. There's nothing that is, it's impossible that there could be something that's permitted for the Jews but prohibited for the idolaters. It means say we can't have less responsibilities as a Jew. We have to have more responsibilities as a Jew. Gemara says, really the case? What about the Yifas Toar? The Yifas Toar is the captive woman, which the Jew, if he's in battle, is allowed to marry her, but it's only a law for the Jew, not for the idolater. Gemara says, no, the reason there is Mishum Delavane Kibush Ninu. The reason there is because the idolaters are not commanded in the midst of conquering the land. And so therefore, there's only the Jewish people. And so that's the reason, the only reason why Yifas Toar is permitted is during the war to conquer the land. And through that moment, they have the permission to marry her. But otherwise, they don't. And so therefore, it just doesn't apply. The Gemara said to the Noahides, Vare Pachos Mishava Pruta. Well, what about the fact that if it's less than Pruta, the idolater, if the Noahide, if he steals less than a Pruta, he's put to death, whereas there's no penalty for a Jew does it. And so it doesn't apply the laws of theft less than a Pruta. No, it's not that the laws that it's not that a Jew is allowed to steal less than a pruta, but it's just that the idolaters, that it's such a small amount, we assume the Jew has waived his rights to it, whereas the idolater doesn't. Means say also the Jews are commanded about theft in this respect, but we say that if it's less than a pruta, the Jew just doesn't consider it theft because the Jews are Rahmanan, they're merciful, and they are going to waive their rights. But Bnei Noach, the Noahites are Achzarim. They're very harsh in this respect, and they're not going to waive their rights to this less than the pruta. Gemara says, "Kol mitzvah shenemar of Bnei Noach v'nishas Messinai lazel zenemar." But if there was any mitzvah that was said to the Bnei Noach and repeated again at Sinai, it was said to both of them. The Gemara says, let's challenge this idea. V'harei milah, we're at the top of 59b. What about circumcision? Shenemar of Bnei Noach, it was said to the Bnei Noach, T'chsev v'ata es brisi tishmor. It says to Avram, you shall guard my covenant, which is the bris. Benishnis b'Sinai, it was repeated at Sinai, because it says, Ubayom hashmini yimol, on the eighth day you shall circumcise. And we know that it does not apply to the Noahites. It's only to the Jews. It says, "Well, Yisrael Noach." So even though it was repeated at Sinai, it's only a din in the Jew and not in the Noahide. So the Gemara says, "Sa'ula Mishrei Shabbos Udasa." No, that part, that when it's repeated at Sinai, was not to say that it applies to the Bnei Noach. It was only to tell us that the Jew can circumcise even on Shabbos, the Asa. And what does it say? Bayom, it says Bayom Hashmini Yimol Basaro. So Bayom Vafil B'Shabbos, the day even on Shabbos. Mara says, well, what about, here's another example. You're supposed to be fruitful and multiply. That was said to the Noahide. They'll say, Vatem Peruravu, be fruitful and multiply. Benishnis Messinai. And then it was again repeated at Sinai. And yet we know it's a mitzvah for the Jew and not for the Noahide. But it says, it says, go back to your tents, means that you can once again live with your spouses. So the Gemara says, no. And still, and still that was commanded for the Israelites and not for the Jews. Gemara says, no, that's not to tell us that only the Jews are commanded. That's not to tell us that there's a commandment on the Noahides also. That was just to tell us we need a special permission to allow our ancestors to return to their spouses because there had been a prohibition for a specific amount of time. And so we see that anything that's quantified, you need another quantification to release it. Rashi says, the only reason why it was repeated was because there was prohibited 3 days before Torah, and after 3 days, it needed to be allowed for them to return. This is this week's parasha. This is this week's parasha about Har Sinai. And even though the Hetera would come on its own, because there was only a 3-day prohibition, the pasuk is telling us that anything that was prohibited by a court, even though there was a specific time, the court needs to again allow us once the time passes. If that's the case, says the Gemara, if that's the case, all of the 7 Noahide laws that were repeated at Sinai, we should say that each one of them was needed to teach us something new. So, for example, Rashi says, like idolatry was repeated to teach us the death penalty and the different types of prohibitions associated with it. And also Gilui Arayis was repeated to teach us the punishments. So we should say that all of them only apply to the Jews and not to the Noahides. So that's the Gemara's question. So the Gemara says, okay, this is what we say. Azhara mihadar umisnaba lamui. Gemara says, why does it have to go back and repeat the warning? So the reason why it goes back and repeats the warning is to tell us that it's prohibited to both Jews and the Gentile and the Noahites. So and now the next clause. What's the example of something which was said only to the Noahides and not repeated at Sinai, and then we say it applies only to the Jews and not to the Noahides? The only example we have about this is the Gidam Nasha, the prohibition of eating the sciatic nerve. Aliba de Rabbi Yehuda, according to the position of Rabbi Yehuda, who said it was applied to the children of Yaakov. The Gemara says, Hani nami lo isni. So the Gemara says, but also the mitzvah of circumcision and being fruitful and multiplying were not repeated at Sinai because they were said only for specific laws. So why did he say it's only Gidam Nasha was not repeated at Sinai? Gemara says, no, Hani isni l'shum milsa ba'alma. Ha lo isni klal. No, the Puravu and the Bris Milah were repeated to teach us a specific halacha. But this mitzvah of Gidam Nasha was not repeated at all. So he says it was not mentioned at all. Ibayas Ema, or alternatively, Mila Meikara Avram Hudakam Meser Rahmana. Or alternatively, circumcision initially was told just to Avram. Because it says, Vatas Prisi Tishmor. Because it says in the pasuk, "You shall guard my covenant." Atav zaracha acharacha doratam. Atav zaracha in inishachrini lo. You and your descendants are commanded, but another person who's not from the descendants of Abraham is not commanded in it. And so therefore, the mitzvah milah is not said about the Noahides because initially it was just told to Abraham, and it was excluding the Noahides, you and your descendants. Well, if that's the case, if it's Abraham's descendants who are obligated, El Miata b'nei Yishmael chaylo, then the b'nei Yishmael should be obligated. No, that won't work because it says Ki b'yitzchak yikarei l'cha zera. Well, if that's the case, b'nei Esav chaylo, the b'nei Esav should be obligated. No, Gemara says b'yitzchak, through Yitzchak we'll call Yitzchak, not all Yitzchak. So Maskafla Rav Oshaya El Miata b'nei Keturah lo l'chayvu. The b'nei Keturah should not be obligated. Meaning to say, those 6 children that were born to Abraham, they themselves should not have been obligated. Meaning to say, do you want to say now that Abraham did not circumcise all of his children who were in his lifetime? So, and we know that's not the case. It says in the pasuk, if you do not circumcise them, you will have violated my covenant. And that is the Rabos B'nai Keturah. That comes to include the B'nai Keturah that Abram circumcised them. Now the Gemara says, let's see if Adam Arishon, what did he eat? So the Gemara says, Amar Yehuda Marav, Adam Arishon, Adam was not allowed to eat meat. Meaning to say, it states in the pasuk to Noach. It says, it says in the pasuk, God says, "I've given you all the seed on the earth, and all the fruits you shall eat." So how do we touch up this pasuk? It says as follows: all the fruits of the trees you can eat. From the fact that it says all the fruits and the trees you should eat, it means to say that the fruits and of the trees you can eat, but not the chayas haaretz. So you can eat the fruits, but you can't eat the animals. Okay, and when the Bnei Noach came along, then they were allowed to eat the meat, as it says, I give you the animals like the Yerek Esav. I give to you everything. So the Gemara says, I might think that they're also allowed to rip the limbs from a living animal. No, you can't do the limbs from a living animal. I might also say that they're prohibited to eat the shratzim. Just the limbs from a living animal you can't eat, but the shratzim you're allowed to eat. The my Talmuda, how do we know that the shratzim are not prohibited in Aver Menachai. How do we learn that from this? I'm Rafunan Damo. Misha Damo Cholok Mi Basaro. This comes to prohibit the Aver Menachai, an animal whose blood is separate from its flesh. Yatsu shratzim, Shein Damam Cholok Mi Basaro. This excludes shratzim whose blood is not separate from their flesh. Gemara challenges Raz's position that Adam was not allowed to eat meat. The Gemara is going to present several challenges to this. Meisvei, it says, Urduvid Gasayam, it says that Adam said to Chava. It says in the Pasuk, it says, Perur Vum Ulas Arts Kivshua Urduvid Gasayam. And then you basically rule over the fish of the sea and the Ofa Shemayim and all the animals that are ruling over the earth. When it says that you're ruling over the fish, it doesn't mean that you're allowed to eat the fish. Gemara says, no, malacha. You can use the fish for your own work. That's what Adam has dominion over the fish. So Gemara asks the question, what are you going to do with the fish? And what kind of work do fish do? They didn't know about sonar back then. So what they were trying to understand, what was the use of the fish? They didn't know that they could use them to send messages. So the Gemara says, in Kirachava, to buy Rachava, Hinig Be'iz of a Shibuta Mai, because Rachava once asked the question, let's say you led a wagon that was basically being led by a goat harnessed with a Shibuta, which is a type of fish. So is that a prohibition? The Gemara has that question also in Baba Kama. And so we see that the fish can work. Tashma, second question on Rav, Uva Of Hashemayim, that you're going to be ruling over the fowl of the heaven. My love doesn't mean that you can eat them. Gemara says no, no, it means to do work. The same question. Are fowl used for work? In Dubai Rabbi Bar Rafuna, Dash Bavazanu Tarnagon, Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda Mai. According to the position that a worker, we want to know if you have to muzzle the bird while it's basically threshing, the fowl while it's threshing with just its feet. So what's the law with respect to birds who do that? Are they not allowed to eat from it, and so therefore you can muzzle them because they're not doing this work with their hand and they're only doing it with their feet, or they're allowed to eat and you're not allowed to muzzle them. So that's the question. So we see birds can do some work, they can thresh. Tashma, what about the next case? Doesn't mean that he could eat all the animals. First, no, that's to tell us that Adam was able to use the snake for work. The Tanya Rabbi Shimon Omer, Chaval al Shemesh Gadol. We should be upset for the Shamash Gadol, the great assistant, Shava Min Olam. When the snake sinned, we lost a great worker for us. Shalmoi Niskal Nachash. We're not for the fact that the snake was cursed. Every single one of the Jews would have arranged for himself two Geshmak snakes. One of them he could send to the North Pole, the Echam Meshago Adaram, and the other one he could send to the South Pole. Stand Lavonim Tovim, to bring him beautiful stones. Lavonim Tovim Margolios, and beautiful precious stones. So not only that, Elishem Avshilin, he would be able to put a strap underneath his tail. Motzi ba'afar, and so therefore the snake will be able to take away the earth from the marketplace, to his garden, and so therefore the snake had a purpose, and that's what Adam was. Well, that's what the pasuk is referring to. Meisvei, the Gemara says, we have another question. How could we say that Adam didn't eat meat? Yehuda ben Tema Omer, Adam Arishon, Mesav began Eden that Adam was reclining in the Garden of Eden, and the angels were throwing him meat and wine. The snake saw this and was jealous. And so we see that Adam was eating meat. And Gemara says that was a different type of meat Asim and Basar Yorim min Hashemayim. That was the meat that came down from heaven. So that's all Adam was eating. It wasn't the regular meat. It's a different type of meat, and so it's not really meat. So he was allowed to eat it. And the Gemara says, Mika b'basar yorim min Hashemayim. Is there such a thing as meat that comes down from heaven? The Gemara says, yes, there is. In Kiyadu, Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta, Avaka'azo be'orcha. Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta was walking along the road. Pagabo hanach arvasa. He met a bunch of lions who were hungry. Da havu kanami la'ape. That they basically saw him as a nice piece of bread. They wanted to eat him. Amar, he said, so Rabbi Shimon Chalafta said the pasuk, Hakfirim shalagim lataref. The young lions are roaring for their prey, and they want to eat them. They're requesting from God to eat them, meaning to say that since the lions want to eat him, he was requesting from Hashem their food. That's how he touches up the pasuk from Tehillim. When the lions come to eat, then request from God that they get other food, so that they don't view you as their lunch. So immediately, nechitule tarte tamat mata. So immediately, two pieces of meat fell down from the sky. Chada achlua. So one the lions ate. The chada shavkua. The other one they didn't want to eat. Why don't they want to eat? I don't know. It doesn't tell us. They were full. So what happened then? I say he brought the second piece of meat. The also the midrash came to the base midrash. So they asked him a question: Devar Tame, who's that? Oh, Devar Tar. And so he asked this question: Is this kosher? Is this meat kosher or not? And they said to him, "Ein Devar Tame Yored Min Hashamayim." There's nothing non-kosher that comes down from heaven. It's from heaven, of course. It's kosher. What's your question? So by me name Rabbi Zer, me Rabbi Avo. So Rabbi Zer asked the question of Rabbi Avo. I just want to pause for a second. Why did he actually explicitly pray? Why did he just say the prayer was like a hint? So the Chida explains it shows the greatness of Shimon Chalafta that even he looked like he was just reciting a verse and still haven't responded. The Ben Yehoyada says so. He didn't want anybody to be praying against his prayers. Anyway, so then Rabbi Zera asked the question from Rabbi Avo, what about Yardo de Muscha Mormahu? What if the animal that came down was a donkey? Can you eat that? Amarle, Yarad Nawa. This is basically, Rashi tells us it means a foolish crocodile. Or else maybe it's a type of bird, it's called a tanin. And it's not, it's not a crocodile. It's a type of bird. It's a type of bird that we call a tanin, but it's not what we call a tanin. Rashi says it's a bird whose name is tanin, and it's a foolish bird. It's always crying and whining about what it's losing. And Rashi says the targum of it is called a yerudin. So anyway, he was insulted. They insult him. They say, "You foolish bird!" Basically, stop whining. However, didn't they just say, "Ein davar tamei yoram min hashemayim"? If it comes down from heaven, it's not. It has to be kosher. I was also thinking that we could say that this is meat that comes down from the sky, and of course it's kosher. It's not. It doesn't have the same laws of meat that we have with the same. So like a donkey is typically not kosher, but if it comes down from the sky, it's kosher. I was thinking we could look at this like the lab-grown meat, which is just like this unbelievable thing. It's like coming down from the sky. It's not traditional meat. You could grow meat in a laboratory. And maybe this is like indication that maybe we should look for ways to make it kosher. Okay, we'll stop the recording here. We say to Rabbi Yosef,